Welcome to the Lawn Care CEO podcast. My name is Dan Ralphs. I'm the head coach of the Lawn Care CEO. Joining me today is the CEO of the Lawn Care CEO, Aaron Suttonfield, and a very special guest star, Greg Crabtree. Now, this is a little embarrassing, Greg, because we probably aren't, we told you a little bit in advance, but we probably aren't doing justice to how fanboys we are of you. And we won't bow down in worship or anything like that, but we're huge fans. So let me introduce Greg Crabtree officially. Greg is the author of two books that we highly recommend. The first one is Simple Numbers, Straight Talk, Big Profits, and the second one is Simple Numbers 2.0. Both like probably the best work. Like I had a CEO come to the other day and he goes, Dan, I want to get better at the finance side. I know that I'm deficient. I want to get better. What should I read? And at that moment, I didn't have anything for him because I hadn't found Greg Crabtree yet. Now I would say, if you're not where you need to be on your financial literacy or understanding of your business finances, this is your go-to first read. Like that's how strongly we feel about it. We're now having all of our clients read it. It's that important to us. So we're huge fans of Greg's. And so Greg, welcome to the podcast. We'll try not to be too gushing if we haven't already.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. That's high praise for a chicken farmer from Alabama,
Well, tell us a little of the story, like from chicken farmer to I don't know the industry well enough to know if you're redefining the industry, but you are talking about things very differently than I've heard them talked about before.
Oh yeah. Um, I don't know that I'm taking on the industry as a whole, but we're certainly affecting the entrepreneurial focus segment. For a couple of reasons. I mean, number one, I picked accounting because I grew up on a egg farm where we gathered 7,000 to 8,000 eggs a day by hand, and so that teaches you what you don't want to do for a living.
I was going to think it taught you to count real well.
Yeah, I could count. But also it meant that my mom, she really respected the guy who did her taxes, and he worked in an air conditioned office, and I said that's good enough for me. Yeah, and so that was the extent of my research into it. First year out of college, this is 1978. I'm going, oh my goodness, is this what I actually do every day? And I somehow survived and got to a small office with the firm I started with, and that they moved me to their Huntsville office a year into working with them from Birmingham, and I had a good mentor in that office, and I saw a picture in the partner of that office of someone that everybody called and wanted his input on, but I knew I didn't know enough, and so I needed that spurred a true yearning to learn. And I have learned infinitely more post college than I ever did in college.
Haven't we all? Haven't we all,
Yeah,
Aaron?
yeah. And,
me more than you two, I promise you.
and but still, it was that thing that fortunately, 5 years into my profession, I got hired by a bank to be their controller. That was the first time I touched a PC. So this was 1983, first generation IBM PC.
Yeah.
5 1/4 floppy disk. But fortunately, my data center manager, said, "Hey, I think this 123 program might be good. You might want to check it out." And then once I got a hold of a spreadsheet, oh my goodness, where have you been all my life? And there's still vestiges of what I did.
It's kind of mind blowing to me to see how far we've come. Like I can't imagine business without spreadsheets at this point.
I will tell you, it was absolutely dreadful. We had a mainframe computer at the bank that I got one balance sheet and P&L every day. And if you make an error in an entry, it's another day to correct it if you did it the correct way. You just look at, how far we've come. But even in that environment in 1983, I took the bank from having bad data reliably the day of the board meeting that was highly questionable to I had the books closed by noon of the first day of the month with comparisons to budget this year versus last year. It was harder to print it than it was to actually do it. And it taught me a lot of those things in terms of good functional data. And And that I held that with me, but I went back into practice after 3 years because it's like, okay, once I got everything
Yeah.
fixed, it's like I was bored, it's
That's a great phrase though, this kind of idea of functional data.
functional accounting. Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I
it
I
is.
feel like so much, like I was talking to a guy earlier today, honestly, and he's got his local accountant doing his books, and they report him out, and he has zero really insight into what it costs him to produce labor, what it costs him to produce work,
Yeah.
and so he ends up at the end of the day kind of doing bank account bookkeeping, which is like, do I have
Mhm.
more money this month than I did last month? And that's about as good an insight as he gets.
Yeah.
Talk about the difference in the way that you approach that versus, because I feel like a lot of accounting's built for accountants and the
Oh, it is.
tax
Yeah,
guys and not
absolutely.
for CEOs.
Well, it really goes back to probably the best story to tell is I joined a group called the Entrepreneurs Organization in
Hmm.
2001, and
Great
so
organization. Yep.
um, I'm there for many years until about 2 years ago. I was the only EO member from Huntsville, Alabama, where my practice is. I joined the Atlanta chapter at the time. This was in 2001, and the organization was, in its growing stages then. We were about probably 7,000 members globally then, or we're probably about 20,000 members now worldwide.
Yeah.
But in my Atlanta chapter, I had 9 forum mates that I met with every month for 4 hours that I couldn't do business with because of forum rules. And so I used them as my focus group. And so I'm doing my first presentation, of what we were trying to do as a practice. Because even at that point, I had this urging of there's more, there's got to be more. And yeah, you had to do tax returns, you had to do bookkeeping, you had to do, audits and reviews, to keep the lights on. But I always gravitated to the consulting projects, and we'd been looking into some things,
Mm.
but nothing had really formed then. But these guys really crystallized it for us. And I said, how many of you would recommend your current accountant? And the answer was zero. So on a net promoter score scale, zero is pretty bad for a
Yeah, it's bad.
profession. And that's pretty much where the profession sits. They're necessary, but
Yeah.
there's you know, and so it's like, okay, well, what are we not doing that you want us to do? And the first thing was that nobody likes the tax day surprise, which I get. And I'd already figured
Hmm.
out a way to deal with that. Now, there's a cost to it, but there's a way to know and not have that, not it ever be a surprise, and
Yep.
if you're willing to deal with it. I said, okay, well, what else? Well, we don't like being billed by the hour. And this really
Ah.
was a beginning of the understanding of, and I tell audiences now, so when I'm doing a talk, I'll ask, how many of you bill by the hour? And usually it's 30 to 50% of the room, depending on the industry I'm talking to.
Sure.
And I go, well, I got bad news for you. If you bill by the hour, there's only two possible outcomes. You either gave away your expertise or you charged for your ignorance. And both of those are bad.
Ha, ha.
Can we pause for a
That's
second right here?
that says
Because
Yeah,
if you're a lawn care business owner,
yeah,
I want you to hear what Greg just said. Those of you that are doing shrub trimming or cleanup services,
yeah.
I hear this a lot, Greg, where they'll say,
Mhm.
"Hey, I'm going to bill by the hour for that because I really don't know how much to charge."
Right.
And the reality is, we talk a lot about paying for performance in our industry, and it's a
Hmm.
great way to pay. Hopefully, we'll be able to ask you some
Yeah,
questions about it.
yeah,
But
absolutely.
if you're doing pay for performance, you
Hmm.
can't really charge by the hour. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so the I think we should talk a little bit more about this hourly thing because you've hit on something that
Oh, yeah.
Dan, you deal with this too. You have guys who say, "Hey, I'm going to bill by the hour for irrigation repair or shrub trimming or something like that," and
Yeah.
you're leaving money on the table, in my opinion. So I
Yeah.
love that you brought this up.
Yeah. And so we'll get to that, as we talk about some of our core concepts. But that one was the first one says, okay, well, the guy who got me into was a client of mine, and
hmm.
he had already we became good friends as well as clients. And he and I would have a lot of theoretical business discussions, and he would tell us, he said, you accountants are all the same. I ask you how much something's going to cost, and you say depends on how much time I have in it. And he says time is not a value, time is a
Yes.
cost.
Yes.
And he's right.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
anyway, so everything we do now in our consulting practice is fixed price, so we don't bill by the hour.
That's
We
interesting.
Yeah, so
Remind me the name
everything.
of your practice. It's Crabtree something and something.
That was our original. We
Oh,
we
okay.
merged we merged in 2020 with a national CPA firm, Carr Riggs and Ingram. So it's a top 20 U.S. accounting firm. So we're part of
Wow.
a big firm now. But our practice unit is called Simple Numbers CRI, is our practice name. So we're a
Got it.
subsidiary. We're kind of a special
Cool.
practice unit. So we're not even a CPA firm by technicality, but we're owned by a CPA firm.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
Car Rigs is like 3,000 employees. We go pretty much from North Carolina to New Mexico. Pretty
yeah.
much in
And how
southern
big is
states.
your practice unit, your team?
So our practice team is about 25 people. And so
Amazing. Good for you.
yeah, and
Congratulations.
yeah, and so in ours, and like I said, when I started in EO, it takes $1 million of revenue to be a qualifying member. 100% of our clients were in Huntsville, Alabama in 2001. Today, 98% of our revenue is not in Huntsville, Alabama. So
Yeah.
we have clients all over the world, from Australia, Canada, some in the Middle East, some dotted here. We've done some project work here and there in Asia. Most of the clients are all over the U.S. But we're not geographically centric, and we're not industry centric.
Yeah.
We believe that our simple numbers concepts are universally accepted in every. We've not seen an industry yet that it didn't work in,
Yeah.
and
So
so.
you keep talking about this concept, so I can hear my audience in the back of my mind going, all right, let's get to it. What is it?
But
So,
let me say one more thing. But
yes.
the third thing was what created simple numbers.
Oh,
What they
yes,
told us.
please. We interrupted the story. I forgot Aaron interrupted.
So so tax day, fix that. Fixed price, fix that. And they said this was something that they didn't teach us in school. Hey, you see hundreds and hundreds of businesses' most intimate details. You got to have some idea what works and what doesn't.
Mm,
They're right, because we see as a
preach.
profession the most intimate details more than any advisor, even your spouse. We see it more than anybody.
Yeah.
Now, what that required me to do is do something that is anathema to a CPA. We had to start studying data with nobody to pay us to do it. But
How dare
but
you? How
how
dare
dare they?
you?
Yeah. But we did that because I went to the data to create what we talk about in simple numbers. I went and asked the data the questions, not go to the
It's
data and get
brilliant.
proof text for my
That is
ideas.
so smart. I
Right.
used to think if I were gonna, go back into, I just thought my accountant had all this information
Mhm.
at his fingertips,
Right.
and my CPA, and I was thinking I'd love to see what he sees, because he's got to know the ones that are really doing it well and the ones that aren't.
Yeah.
And I would think that they would know which industries to go gamble on, right?
They generally have no clue.
And and and
Ah,
and and
Because
Greg,
here's the
this.
thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Here's the thing. As an accountant, what you're taught to do is assemble the pieces and get to an end report, rather than, well, really, we need to start at the top and drill our way down. And analysis comes, and they didn't teach us to
Yeah.
do that in school.
So
And
cool.
on top of that, they didn't teach us to believe anything. They taught us rules. Well, those rules aren't understanding. Those rules aren't, figuring out the, in the marketplace, there's correlations and causations. We way too much in business
Mm-hmm.
media and discussion of business live in the world of correlation that are maybe random consequences, rather than, I want to get to causation. If I
Yeah,
do
preach.
this, this is a super high probability of this happening.
So the way we talk about that, Greg, because we agree 100% with this idea.
Mm,
To me, my initial epiphany, one of the reasons we started our business Lawn Care CEO, was because I said, why isn't business coaching like the medical practice?
mm,
There should be there are universal laws that all of us are operating on.
right,
Even though each individual business is unique, it also is the same.
right.
Meaning
But
there are a
think about it
handful of
like
core
this.
systems.
Yeah, but think about it like this, though, in a sports analogy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different teams that win the national championship in college football, and so
And
we're
and
still
are they all from Alabama, or there's more?
they've more times than not been from Alabama, and from the SEC. Except the last couple of years,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, we'll have to tip
But
our
your
hats.
point is a lot of different
But
teams. Yeah.
that's right. And the thing is, we're playing the same game, but there's different playbooks. And so the
Hmm.
idea is, so this is where understanding, you start playing three-dimensional chess instead of checkers.
Yeah.
is the fact that, listen, here are the resources that I have. And you read Simple Numbers,
Sure.
Straight Talk, Big Profits. In there, I talk about NFL. You got
Yeah.
32 teams that pay exactly the same amount of wages, playing the exact same game every year. But why is it the Cleveland Browns have never made the Super Bowl? It's called bad management.
Yeah. Yep.
And you look at, used to, I could say the Patriots, and they've kind of fallen off a bit, but now you look at Philadelphia, you look at and obviously Kansas City's had the best run of late, and those are extremely well managed, and
Yeah.
they know what their resources are, and they adapt each year with some nuances to the resources that they have. Same in
Yeah.
in college
And
football and
and
those
and I,
things.
and I don't know the NFL as well as you might, but I assume there are formulas that are very similar. Like if I were to go into the
Yeah,
the Eagles organization and see
yeah,
kind of their way of approaching it and the Chiefs organization, there would be, even though they would be unique, like one's a
yeah.
focus, one's defense focused, there would
Correct.
be some commonalities. And the commonality is the fact that they do what you're saying, which is they organize around their resources, they
Right.
understand their strengths and weaknesses, and they execute a game plan at a very high level
Yeah.
based on those
Now,
resources.
now here's the interesting thing that is very similar to business.
Hmm.
Most businesses, roughly 50% of the money you're going to spend is labor. And the salary cap in the NFL is 50% of the
Oh,
team's
interesting.
revenue shares the salary cap is 50% of labor.
Hmm.
Where are you going to allocate that labor? Are you going to be heavier to
Mm.
direct labor and less management? I can't go heavy, heavy because I won't be profitable. I can't go light, light, or I things
I
will break.
won't get the talent. Yeah,
Won't
won't be
get,
able to
yeah,
find people.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so ultimately, it is a lot about, and this is where I think what you guys do is so valuable, to the industry. Everybody needs coaching. I mean, the best of the best businesses that have been launched and endured in the U.S. economy and really globally, but especially U.S. These people had coaches that
Yeah.
you need that person who is holding you accountable, keeping you on pace, can challenge you in a way that a line manager can't and get away with it. And I
I do
think a
think
lot
there's
of that
I
is
do think
really
there's an
critical.
inflection in the entrepreneurial journey. Tell me if you've seen this,
Mhm.
where the young lone wolf entrepreneur, it clicks for him and he goes, "Oh, this is not an individual sport. It's actually a team game."
Right.
Whether it's EO or whether it's something else, where it's like, no, I'm actually supposed to work as a group of
It,
people rather than just my lone genius.
well, it's two things that triggers that. Number one, certainly, is you have peer interaction. I always tell people, says the day you become an entrepreneur, you have to change social groups, because
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden the people
Mm-hmm.
that are friends of yours that are employees, when they start talking about work, you can't say anything because you agree with their boss.
Aaron and I are both laughing. Aaron and I are both laughing because he's like, I can't go to parties anymore because
Right.
Unless it's a
no, I
bunch of
don't relate to anyone.
entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now, here's the second thing that triggers, and I talk about this in the first book as well. It's called the black hole. And
Mm-hmm.
so as an entrepreneur, the black hole is between 1 million and 5 million of revenue. The deepest, darkest moment of the black hole is at 3 million. Why is it 3 million? Well, once you eclipse 1 million, you start to have to realize that, like you said, you can't do this alone.
Yep.
Now I can stretch and stretch and stretch, and there's plenty of entrepreneurs that get stuck in that 2 million range and are right around three that are trying to be all things. But at 3 million, that's the reason why it's the deepest, darkest moment. If I start hiring to work on the business and get out of the working in the business, I can't actually afford that full-time manager. And this is the part that, for anybody who's read E-Myth and heard, Michael Gerber
Yep.
talk about working on your business rather than in of it. I really wish he hadn't said that, because I can't tell you how many times people come to us in a broken state that they're thinking that they should work on their business 100% of the time. It's like, no, 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 no. And I don't think that's what Gerber was trying to say either.
No.
There's a time to work in it and a time to work on it. And for the most part, once you set your strategy, leave it alone and go execute. It's time to go do. And so we see two strategies that get you through the 3 million part and get past to that 4 and 5. Number one
Yep.
is, people say, oh, I'm supposed to work on my business. And so I'm going to hire these people. And all of a sudden profitability crashes and they have no capital. They can't, their cash flow sucks. And usually these are people I run into at an event and they say, hey, I'm having trouble with cash flow. I says, no, you don't. You have trouble with profitability. We fix profit, cash flow is going to fix itself.
Yeah, 100%.
And almost 99% of the time. But but then those people have to back up and reset. And the one strategy that's not fun, you're not going to like it, but sometimes you got to eat your vegetables with no seasoning. You have to stretch the hell out of everybody to get through 3 million. And once you get to that 4 million, you can then start to add management labor that you can afford.
Yeah.
Now, that's not a sexy answer. That's not a bougie answer that everybody's gonna, just clap
Yep.
when I tell them that. But I'm telling you from rep after rep after rep of working with businesses to get them through that. That's actually what works.
Yeah. The secret sauce is work hard and
Right.
struggle
Yeah.
and push.
But it is
And
amazing that once you get to that 4 million and then on to 5, the clouds part and the sky clears. And it's
yeah,
like,
I had an
okay,
entrepreneur
this
put it
is
this
going to
way. He
work.
said he'd grown a company up to 200 million plus, and he said hardest period was that period.
Yeah,
That's exactly what he said. It
it
was
is.
like he called it 1 to 10
Yeah.
was the hardest
Yeah, and
stretch.
there'll be moments, that you'll still face those other things, and a lot of times those are more so, just refining your team because that team you started with ain't going to be the team you finish with,
Yeah.
and we all have this illusion thinking I'm the first person I hired. I thought they're going to work with me forever, and no, they didn't, and it's just the way it works.
So
Yeah.
let's talk about this growth process.
Hmm.
So like when we meet a lot of companies, like let's imagine we'll call it a $1 million lawn care business. The
Yeah.
guy has gotten this thing going, and usually the question I'll ask is, so what's your top line? And they'll go 1 million, and they'll act very proud. And I say, well, is that very profitable? And they kind of get a glum look on their face, like, oh no.
Yeah.
And so if you're meeting that kind of character, and you've met hundreds of them, I'm sure thousands,
Yeah.
uh, where do we start?
Well,
Where do we begin if we're trying to kind of start to dig our way out of the hole of
mhm,
unprofitable work?
yeah.
And like, what do we look at first if we're looking at the P&L, or where do
Our,
we go?
well, ours is really, kind of a 5-step process. And so the
Okay.
first step is, now you're already talking about a specific industry, but yet there's a lot of nuances to the industry you're talking about. So,
Sure. Sure.
you know,
Sure.
and oh, by the way, it's not exactly the same in every geography because some are all year round, some are lightly seasonal, and some
Yeah.
are heavily seasonal, and so you got to factor all those things in. So at
I,
the end of the day,
Greg, just let me pause and say, I'm so glad you said that, because far too often, even on a podcast like this, people will hear something and take it the wrong way. Like, it's like some doctor will say antiseptic's good, and they're like, I better go get some. Or I need antibiotics are good,
yeah,
and they'll go get antibiotics. And it's like, no, no, no. Like you need a doctor to prescribe that to you
yeah.
before
Yeah.
you go make a big decision here. And
Yeah.
that's back to your point of coaching. But step number one, you're
Well,
like, we're going to have to get to know this business a little bit, probably.
yeah. So step one to us is and this really got highlighted during COVID. You have to assess the market for your ability to
Hmm.
is your market growing and there's availability, and will the market let me be profitable? Because there are actually some
Interesting.
industries and some
Mhm.
locations that there's unique situations of either cost of labor, lack of growth in the market, those kind of things that even in a core service in the lawn care type industry,
Yeah.
it's more muted than in another area. And so
Yeah,
that's
like,
the first thing you look at and
you
say,
know,
okay, what's the assessment?
a good example of that would be, we talk to people who are in large metropolitan regions, right? There's, 3, 4, 7 million people, right?
Yeah,
Or we may be talking to someone who literally has 20,000 people in their market.
that's right.
It's going to be hard to be a niche service in a 20,000 person
That's right.
market. We probably need to paint the house, mow the lawn, clean the window, right? I mean,
That's right.
we better do more, right? Whereas in a $7 million market like Phoenix, for example, where Dan is, And you could be one little niche in that market.
That's right. And we have some very, in this industry, we have some very niche businesses in the Phoenix market that when they stick to their knitting, they do really well. So now, so that's the first thing. Step two is what I talk about in chapter 1 of the first book, eliminate distortions. I must look at truth of profit. So any business is below 5 million, and probably even businesses below 10, but in that 5 to 10 million and below range, you really struggle with truth, because if you're an S corporation, you're underpaying yourself a salary because you're trying to save payroll taxes. Well, that is just a stupid ass idea, and
Thank
just
you.
to be quite honest, because yeah, you can probably get away with it because IRS doesn't have the manpower to go do the shareholder audits like they should be doing. And so it's allowed the marketplace to kind of get away with something. But 100% of the time that we've done this, we get somebody to elevate their salary to a true market wage of what would you pay someone if you had to hire somebody to do the job you do every day. Not only does that business owner now get a bigger salary, they will now see truth in profitability, and then they will elevate profitability to where they're now making a total number that just dwarfs any random payroll taxes that you're going to owe.
How do I think about that if I'm a little guy with like 8 hats? I'm producing, I'm marketing, how do you fix a true market salary to something like that?
That actually I had that question yesterday when I was doing a presentation in Atlanta. And the idea being, you're probably not going to take 8, but you're probably going to do. So essentially in business, there's the big 4. So when Vern Harnish, wrote originally the Rockefeller Habits before he wrote Scaling Up, I thought he had probably the best functional list of functions inside a business, and I call it the big 4 and the little 4. The big 4 being CEO, head of the business, head of marketing, head of sales, head of operations. Those are the big 4 functions. So I don't need to probably get any further deeper than that. The little 4 functions, finance, HR, IT, and customer advocacy. So those, and most of those little 4 are going to probably float up to the operations head in most businesses. Generally, and so as I talked about earlier, going from that 1 million to 5 million, we call that the entrepreneurial mitosis. So you're a single cell amoeba as an entrepreneur doing the big 4 functions. At that 2 million to 3 million mark, you have to split into 2 cells, and you either have to give up operations or give up marketing and sales. Now, the data is blinding that an owner who gives up marketing and sales as their primary ownership function will get stuck. It's the hardest position to hire when you're small. I don't care if you like it or not. I don't care if you don't think you're good at it. Suck it up. And once you get to that 4 and 5 million, you can then start to hire talent and delegate. And there's ways that I don't have, when I say own it, I don't have to do every piece of it, but I do. The people will deal with the owner in a different way than they will deal with the hired salesperson. And every now and then you'll find somebody as you emerge, and then you can start to spread it out. But operations talent, it's the old baseball adage: you shake a tree and out falls 9 gloves and 1 bat. They'll find a place for the field in the guy that can hit to play. They don't care how bad of a fielder he is. But there's a lot of good gloves that can't hit their weight. And operations talent and market talent, that drives the business. And so as you go through that phase, that's really, kind of what's critical.
Okay. So sorry about that. I'm interrupting. No, there's a little technical difficulty, but it was so good. What you were talking about was so good. Aaron and I, after the technical, we were like, this is so good. So you said 9 gloves fall out, 1 bat. Oh, yeah. And man, it's going to be hard to find that sales hat. But if you happen to have a bat fall out first, go for it, right?
That's right.
But it's just not likely to happen. And so just get cozy with the fact that you're going to be in that sales seat for a while. That's so we were rooted in this idea that said, hey, if I am like, there's this whole challenge. This is what you mean by getting true numbers. There's this whole challenge of saying, like, what part of my day is overhead? What part of my day is direct labor? What part of my day goes to the marketing, cost of acquisition stuff? And how do I get a fair salary for myself? So again, I don't know that we got a clear answer on that yet.
Okay, well,
Like,
I'll
how
get
do
there.
you think that through? Yeah.
Okay. So really the idea is don't overthink it at that size,
Mm-hmm.
because one of the things that has emerged out of all this. So once we cleared the distortions and we're looking at truth for you as a salary that,
Yeah.
like I said, do a blended roll a percentage of time between those big four functions, but it's going to be those four functions. Don't try
Well,
to blend
and
in
I
time.
had somebody
Yeah.
ask me, this was real small, 350K, and
Yeah.
he's trying to do his numbers right. And I said, well, think about your overhead expense. He's like, he's like, I don't have to take a lot of money out. I can keep a bunch of money in, which is admirable.
Yeah.
And I said, well, maybe like think about percentage of overhead and take a percentage of that, and that fixed your salary, because he probably can't
There's
pay
a
himself a fair rate
No,
yet at that
but
point.
see, if you, it's better to think of it, if you were just the owner of the business and hired somebody to do the job and you just were the owner, there's a
Hmm.
market way. I mean, you can go to salary.com, which is a free
Yeah.
service,
Okay.
put in a wage survey, and they'll give you an answer that the free services are about 10% too high, but that's okay. I'd rather you aim high. It's going to be good
Mm.
enough. Once you have that number, you're going to have economic truth of, am I profitable? Am I not? And paying it may be a whole nother issue. You may not can afford to pay it,
Oh.
but I need to account for it. And because there's a lot of years that, I set my salary at a market wage, but I didn't get every paycheck because we just couldn't afford it. We were reinvesting, or, I didn't know what I know now. I would have done better. Um, and so those get you to the truth. But here's the ultimate thing in that 5 million and under business that we found. If you're in the lawn care industry, whether you're doing tree shrubs or whatever, hey, you, I need $2 of gross margin for every dollar of labor, regardless of what that labor does. I don't care if it's direct. I don't care if it's management. I don't care if it's taking the trash out. I got to get $2 of gross margin. Gross margin being revenue minus subcontractors and cost of materials, but not labor, not my internal labor. And this has been just a fascinating piece that we try to get too refined too soon,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of movement in those early
Mm-hmm.
stages of I'm sometimes direct and I'm sometimes management. And
Sorry,
so,
I'm going to repeat this because I just barely got it. I want to make sure we got it,
Yeah.
because this is such an
yeah,
important point.
right.
So $2 for every $1 I spend on any labor, not just direct labor, but any labor in the business, any payroll
All,
in the
all y'all
business.
labor, right.
So if my
Now,
if
and
my
that's just
payroll in the business,
wages. That's just
just
wages.
wages.
I don't care about payroll taxes. I don't care about health
Okay.
insurance.
So
Just
if
two
I
to one.
if my wages for the year were 250,000, I want to have made $750,000. No,
Gross
five
margin.
hundred thousand dollars
Five hundred
gross
thousand
margin.
gross margin. Exactly.
Gross
Gross
That's
margin.
it.
margin.
Yeah. And
And
and I'll
and
give
to
you a practical
clarify
example. Let me give
clarify
you a
real quick.
practical example. Well, let me give you an example,
Okay.
and
All right.
then
Okay.
all right. So I'm teaching a class, and guess what? Lawn care is no different than a marketing firm. So I'm teaching a class up in Connecticut a couple of years ago, and this girl had $50,000 a month of wages, and she was struggling. And I said, hey, so here's the deal. How much do you have a month in wages? She said $50,000, and that included her at a market-based wage as the owner. I said, now, 50,000 times two is what? 100,000. So here's the question. So it was in September, and I said, for October, have you sold $100,000 worth of gross margin work? And she said, yes. Great. Can your team that currently exists produce 100,000 in the month of October? She said, yes, but.
Mm.
Okay, what's the but?
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
Well, we've we've got some other projects that we've already been paid for that we're finishing up, and we got to get those done. It says that's a problem because, and here's the answer, and you're not going to like it. You've got to produce the 100,000 of the new work that you sold, and you got to tell your team, listen, for the next 30 days, we have to get caught up and produce our normal number, or else you're going to be a dog chasing your tail for the rest of your life. But you got to
Mm.
get caught up and live to that standard month in, month out in that process. Because once I know that number, and just think about the power of this. I know that number from the first day of the month. So now I'm working prospectively throughout the month, aiming at a target versus get to the end of the month, look back maybe by the 15th of the next month or even the end of the next month. Hey, how did we do for last month? Oh, we missed it. You can't do
Yeah.
anything about it then. But when you're working prospectively, I got to hit my number week in, week out, week in, week out. And typically in
Yeah.
the lawn care industry of all the disciplines, you got a reasonably decent estimate of margin creation week in and week out.
Yeah.
You
And
know it.
so this is going to sound like a silly question, but I think there might be something here. Can it be too high if I'm like 3x labor to gross revenue, 4x labor to gross revenue?
You won't be. I mean, if
That's
you're,
the answer.
yeah. If you're super, super, super small, I got news for you. The market will beat you back. I mean, if anything, your struggle is going to be can you get to a two
Yeah.
in reality. There's a couple of super specialties. Like if you're in the one that is really, I mean, if you're in like a very niche tree and shrub care in an area that really prizes that
Yep.
specialty, and you're a one person, two person operator, yeah, you're going to have an insane labor efficiency ratio.
Yeah.
But you can't grow. And so anytime somebody has an outsize more than that too, prove to me that you can double it and keep
Like
it
the
there.
market kind of brings us back to that number for
That's right.
whatever reason.
That's
That's
right.
interesting.
Yeah. But see, when you're there, you're what Michael Gerber, talked about. Oh no, it wasn't my. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal back in the '90s that talked about a single unit Subway franchise. Back when they don't sell them like that anymore. But it did this expose in the '90s, and it said, if you're a single unit Subway, you got a $25,000 a year job with all the headaches of ownership. And
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that is that is the death of an entrepreneur's
But that
dream.
might be that might need to go on the wall in a lot of lawn care business guys' offices because I do think there are a lot in that camp
Now,
where they have the $30,000 a year job with all the frustration of ownership and debt and all the things that go with it.
so let me take you one further step. So the two is an overall health diagnostic. Literally,
Mm,
I can take any company in this industry and give them an immediate target for next month. This is not rocket science. Now, the nuances of how you get there from where you're at, I mean, that's where coaching, that's where industry
sure.
experience, and those kind of things come in. But in terms of setting the number, that's really fairly easy. So it turns out we call him Client Zero.
Mm,
We have a long landscaping client in Omaha, Nebraska that we developed the total LER concept, but when we started working with him, he was the first one that we took labor and split it between direct and management. And generally our split, and this is not a hard rule, but this is kind of our guidance. If you spend 30% or more of your time facing the customer doing the thing that you get paid for as a business, I
okay.
want you to be in direct labor. I'm going to default to direct labor first. And by
Hmm.
default, everything else is management labor. Now, the other thing is no splitting people. It's a butt in a bucket. You're either all of your ass is in direct labor or all of you is in management labor. So we don't it's
Yeah.
just too arbitrary to start splitting people.
Yeah. Not enough
So,
juice. Not enough
so
juice in the squeeze
for
for
for our
That's
group,
right.
allocation stuff.
for our group, we would say direct labor would be field labor. But what I'm hearing here is in your definition, direct labor would also be a salesperson or
Not
someone
necessarily.
who's
No, a
you'd still keep it
salesperson. A salesperson we'd probably have as management labor,
okay.
but the field manager it would
Direct.
be direct. Yeah,
How
even though
about
they might
Mm.
have
customer
manager in their name.
service? Somebody goes out and looks at issues, things like that. Would you say more
Uh,
management?
cu- Customer service, they're kind of on the line, but more than likely, customer. Most of the time, my clients are going to not have dedicated customer service people if they're delivering a service. That customer service is going to be the project manager, the field supervisor, those people.
Yeah.
So anyway, so the next thing that we worked out with this client, so we had his company, we split it between direct and management, but also he did three things. Well, actually, he did four. He did landscaping, he did irrigation, he did mowing, and he did snow removal because in Omaha you've got it was
Yep.
1 out of 5 years you're going to have some snow, but it was a division that you really couldn't control. You kind of used it to just cover some of the overhead you carried in the off season. But in those three, we started focusing on what is the direct LER for that division. And these ratios still kind of hold pretty true to today. You had a 4 LER for landscaping, you had a 4 direct LER for
And when you say
irrigation.
LER, help us understand what
Yeah,
LER stands for.
LER, labor efficiency ratio. And so
Okay,
our
labor
in
efficiency.
our mindset, it's a dollar of labor input to create a multiplier of margin output. So we don't look at labor as a cost of something. We look at it as the catalyst of value creation.
Hmm.
And so it is the fulcrum that you use to create a lever effect of
Yeah, I
input
like
of
that.
labor to create output of margin. And so that's why we don't look at it as a percentage. We just took the percentage that everybody uses, flip the formula, and we look at the numerator is gross margin and the denominator is the labor number. And fundamentally, when you look at the psychology of seeing data, you will respond differently to an LER ratio of output versus a percentage. A percentage is a reduction mindset.
Oh, interesting.
Your brain doesn't process that percentage
Yeah.
effectively in
So give
responding.
us those LER outputs again, because I liked where you're going. I just want to make sure everyone understood.
Yeah. And so in this case, it was a 4 for landscaping, it was a 4 for irrigation, but it's a 2.5 for mowing. And so this client was very adamant about sharing this information with his team. He was an open book kind of guy. And so we got the team together, and we shared this data. And this is my argument, because when I share this with accountants, I mean, their eyes roll back in their head and they start twitching and they're going, but what about allocating this? And just calm down. This is, it's simple numbers. Just calm down.
Simple numbers.
And so the guy, one of the mowing guys who was making $10 an hour, said, looks like to me we shouldn't be in the mowing business. And he was absolutely correct. Because I'm making a 4 multiplier here for landscaping projects that are well managed, and I'm making a 4 multiplier here for my irrigation guys, and I'm only making a 250 multiplier for mowing. And there's a reason for that. It's called respect of the market. I respect a person's ability to manage a complex landscaping production of organizing all of the materials and the resources and getting all those things delivered. Because it's not about revenue. In landscaping, it's about gross margin. What 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 were my cost of materials and subs and equipment I had to
100%.
rent and all those kind of things. It's that net number to the labor that it took to produce it. Irrigation, much more a high-end skill set that's not easy to keep. And once again, I need to bill for it. Mowing, not so much. Although mowing has a lot more challenge to it than you think, and depending on what you're mowing. And today that client does not do mowing. I mean, they will sell it and subcontract it to somebody else and collect a commission. But that's essentially they just got out of the mowing business. Now we've had clients in the mowing business, but the only way that we've seen to be successful in mowing for the most part is using H-2B visa workers, because we famously had a client in Texas that he was in Austin, and I mean, we could measure the productivity of the H-2B visa guys, that they literally produce twice as much as their local counterparts. And at the time, the wage determination for H-2B was like 14.50 an hour. And as I always like to say, when he lost his allocation one year and had to really shrink his business because he couldn't find any local labor. So this goes back to that market condition thing that we started with.
Yep.
If I don't have access to the labor, I cannot create a successful business. And he couldn't. So he had to shrink to the labor that he had. And as we kind of came to the conclusion of, listen, you can't hire a local person to mow grass for 14.50 an hour. They'll smoke grass for 14.50, but they won't mow it.
Yes, they will.
And so once you know these are the building blocks. Goes back to our
Yep.
sports analogy.
Yep.
If I don't have a tight end who can catch the ball, don't throw him the ball.
Yep.
We got to do something else.
Like, and so often, like this sounds elementary, but it really is fundamental. This is why we preach so heavily, know your numbers. And this is the level at which you have to know them. You can't just look at your P&L and understand this stuff. There's a deeper cut of numbers, whether it's by division and whether it's by the ratio of my relationship between my gross margin and my labor costs. Like, these are the key numbers that allow us to pull the right levers when it comes to our business.
And so this is kind of one of the things that we run into, that, when I'm talking to a group of 100 business owners in a room, I said, listen, here's what the problem is. If all of you take your P&L out right now, put it on the table, and compare it with your neighbor, you're all going to be talking a different language, unless you're a simple numbers client. Yep. And we do this. We have a mastermind group that intentionally are not in the same industry. We get them together, but because their data is in our structure, they can have a wonderful, and they become a very fast friends with each other as we've had multiple years of these meetings. But they can read each other's data because there's a common language that we use of gross margin being the true economic top line of the business, the labor efficiency ratio concepts, and then more importantly, really establishing, we've kind of gravitated to looking at profit to gross margin as the pure consistent measure across all industries, because it filters out the noise of revenue that is low margin. I don't care what your margin percentage is. Profit to gross margin, we believe, is the correct targeting mechanism that you look at of what you should make. And our belief is minimum 15% profit to gross margin. Target is 20, stretch is 25. So in this first book, I float the idea of 10% being the new break even, but that was on revenue. And I think I even put in there but there are certain businesses that operate outside of that. And so at that time, I had not done enough research to really look at this profit to gross margin concept. But now we've seen enough data points, and I've proven it that, hey, it's 15, 20, 25 as a profit to gross margin number.
To gross margin,
to gross
not to
margin,
revenue.
not to revenue. Yeah, revenue is the slipperiest, weakest number on the whole P&L.
Thank you.
It's a all hat and no cattle number, and so
yes, we want to lobby for two things. Number one, I would love to lobby the accountant association and just say, can we all speak the same language, pretty please?
And it ain't gonna happen.
I know, but I'm voting Greg Crabtree for president, so this can happen.
Well, and we've got a lot of followers, and and it kind of goes back to one of my gripes about the Inc. 500 list or Inc. 5000. Both is it's based on revenue, and there's really kind of a belief out there that if you make the Inc. 5000 list 3 years in a row, you're in danger of going bankrupt. Because a lot of the people who try to make that list, they over focus on revenue and not profit. And I've actually developed, I'm hoping to deploy this at some point. I got to find the right group to use it with. I've come close a couple of times, but I've got a kind of a business health index that I've developed that looks at gross margin being the top line and the growth of gross margin. Secondly, profit as a percentage of gross margin and from a consistency standpoint, but also measuring volatility of profit. How consistent are you year in, year out? But then last and the most important is return on invested capital. Because
I'm glad you brought up return on invested capital. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think the numbers we've talked about so far is how do we be healthy, and return on invested capital really is like, now that we do have some profit in the business, how do we go invest it wisely? How do we go make it help us to grow and scale? And Aaron and I was mentioning this earlier. It's like a lot of times we bump into companies that are like, we're going to grow to the moon. And you're like, listen, buddy, like, you don't have any profit. Like, how in the world, with whose money are you going to grow to the moon? And so, like, step one is we got to get healthy. And by the way, when that health index comes out, let me know. I would love to share it with our audience. And then two, once you are healthy, now it's time to think about how do we invest in our growth. So talk about return on invested capital, because I love this. I think you're the only one I've heard talk about it.
Yeah, and so I have to give credit to I get to chair the EO at Horton Executive Ed program, and so
Hmm.
I've worked on it. I helped launch the program, and I actually get to share my content along with the two Horton professors, and I've had a great relationship with them because David Wessels, who I met the first year,
Hmm.
he was the first one that clued me in on the concept of return on invested capital. The challenge he has is he only has access to public company data. I've got access to
Mm.
private company data. And so, as far as I know, I am the only person who's ever studied return on invested capital for privately held businesses. And our
So cool.
and the reason why, I mean, it was kind of a side story. So I wrote the first book, finished it in 2011, wrote the second book, finished it in 2020. So in 21, I go in the recording studio to read both books because nobody can read it except me because it's got to be my voice.
Yeah.
But I'm reading the first book, and I hadn't read it in 10 years, word for word. And so I'm thinking, oh gosh, what am I going to read that I don't agree with? And so other than one paragraph that was a tax comment that was no longer valid because law changed, I left that paragraph out. But I got to the finished end of the book, and I'm going. I kind of had this moment to myself of pausing. I'm going, man, that's a pretty good book. I was really pleased with it. And
Yeah, not
and so
not bad for a
then,
chicken farmer, right? Not bad for a
but
chicken farmer.
but this is how our minds work that we just don't know. I was
Hmm.
writing the second book while I was writing the first one, and I didn't know it because what I didn't remember were all the little questions and Easter eggs that I'd left in the text that I answered in the second book
Hmm.
because my brain was searching for this return on invested capital concept. I just had not connected it yet. Once
Yeah.
I connected it, it's like, okay, this was the missing piece. Because I'd always wanted to try to convince my clients, said, listen, your business, treat it like an investment, respect it, nurture it. It's the best returning investment. But I needed a way to quantify it to win the
Hmm.
argument. I couldn't just
Hmm.
win it by emotion. And so now we have proven if you're a U.S. based, I've not seen a U.S. based business yet that couldn't achieve 50% return on invested capital. Now you tell me, year in, year out, can can you think? And now we're talking about a grown business, not a purchase business. But if you grow it yourself, 50% return. And oh, by the way, in the landscaping industry, their target's 75 because they
Mm.
generally will only carry if you carry AR or inventory, but not both, your target's 75% return. And if I'm really good at setting terms and I have market power to where I get paid in advance or I get deposits and I'm really good with managing those things, then I can be as much as 100% return. So would you like 100% CD? Of
Whew.
course.
Whew.
Now,
Yes.
there's a point though that, and this is the challenge that your audience needs to understand about growth. Once I'm fully capitalized, which means I've got 2 months of my cash of my operating expenses with zero drawn on a line of credit. That is the finite definition of fully capitalized, and I have that
Two
number.
2 months operating,
2 months of
no,
operating.
essentially no line of credit, no
Yeah,
credit cards.
and
We're
and that
fully
2 months of
capitalized.
operating is anything I don't get terms on, which is you just leave COGS out because I generally get 30-day or plus terms on COGS. So your all your labor and all your OpEx, 2 months worth. And so once I have that
Hmm.
number, what we find is I don't need cash to grow. I'm actually I create a positive dollar of cash of some amount with every new dollar of sales. So why am I not growing? Well, it's execution.
Hmm.
I only need to exit once I'm fully and see when you starve your business from being fully capitalized, you're fighting the cash monster and you're adding an unnecessary battle that once I get fully capitalized, then I can hone in on profitability. But to grow is only, I mean, I have allocated cost in my monthly P&L that is all the money I need to grow with. I just need to hold it accountable to do its job.
Yep. Yep. We talk about, like, when we think meet companies, we think about them either at critical, like with financially critical, where it's like, you're about to die, buddy. We got to get some things figured out.
Yeah, right.
And the next stage is like healthy, meaning you're stable, you're not going to die. Stable is the next category. And then healthy is this point where you go,
Okay.
we have everything we need at our disposal.
Yeah.
if we're wise, if we, make some good strategic bets,
Mhm.
we're gonna grow. We're gonna be able to
Yeah.
go,
And so,
and that's a really really fun time in business, by the way.
so healthy, by the way, Greg, just so our audience gets this, because we're talking about a lot of things that some of our audience will tune out as soon as we
Mhm.
start throwing, margin and numbers and all these things in. So, would you say a healthy business is one that has no revolving credit lines, right? No line of credit sitting out
Right.
there.
Right.
Credit cards are paid off, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You get
Um,
paid off every month. Yeah.
yep,
I
yep.
mean, you
We,
kind of have a balance. As long as they're paid off every month, I'm
yeah.
fine.
Um, we've got 2 months of operating expenses saved, and our
Yep.
and our bank balance doesn't go below that, right? Whether we set it
Exactly.
aside or we just monitor that number. Okay,
That's
so
yeah.
if you're spending 50 grand a month to operate your business, you need to keep a balance of 100,000 in the checking account. Okay,
Exactly. Yep.
all right. We're paying the owner at or above market wage,
Yep.
right? So another thing on that, real quick, is I tell our owners, take that number home with your family and set a budget on that.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
I talk to them all the time about like I think about dieting, and if Greg, if you said I'm going to lose 60 pounds, and you said, hey, I'm only
Yeah.
eating salmon, steamed broccoli, and water, I'd be
Yeah.
like, bull crap, Greg, you're not going to lose weight. You'll be off that diet in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So set a market wage that can feed your family and take the kids on a trip occasionally and do some things,
Yeah.
because this is a long marathon that we're going to go on,
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
right?
and here's why that's so important. Because if I can live off my market-based wage, which will
Hmm.
continue to get bigger as I get bigger too,
Yep.
because the market will give you more money. Then, for every $100,000 of profit, there's three things competing for that profit number once I'm fully capitalized. First is taxes. Got news for you. If you think that you're going to find some magical way to not pay taxes, you're going to go to jail eventually because there's not. There just isn't. So just stop it. Pay the tax. I mean, generally, the average tax rate is about 35 to 40%, unless you're in California or New York, and I can't help you there. So sorry, that's your problem.
Move.
But outside of those two states, 40% is a good enough number to set aside, and you'll have some extra money left over. So we got 60,000 left over. Now, I need to leave probably until I have too much cash at a measurement point, either quarterly or annually. I'm going to leave 30% of profit in the business for variation temporarily, for working capital purposes. And then I can reliably distribute 30%. That 30% that I distribute, I can distribute it probably quarterly, at least, sometimes 6 months, sometimes, but I'd probably distribute it more often. But I wouldn't treat it like a paycheck though. Don't, because if you take it out monthly, it's going to get consumed and used for
Hmm.
discretionary consumption
You
purposes.
start to build a lifestyle around that,
That's right.
and
You
that's
want
not.
that 30% to build wealth external to the business. And
Hmm.
and and I'll tell you, my first thing that I want you to do with it, I want you to accelerate the payoff of your residence.
Mm.
I don't care, and I don't care if your interest rate's at 2%.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Yeah,
It's
for
a,
me,
it,
we're kind of Dave Ramsey guys, so we're
yeah,
always like, then go talk to Dave Ramsey and get your personal wealth in order, right?
yeah, yeah,
Because we're big fans of his, and he might not be
absolutely.
perfect, but the approach
Now,
he takes, I think, really works.
for the business, the one thing that I do want people to use debt for is production equipment that has a useful life. As long as the payment is over the true useful life of that piece of production equipment, I don't want you wrecking your cash flow paying cash for production equipment.
Mm.
Now, if you're in the lawn mowing business, hey, a mower is going to get burned up. I mean, don't even think about financing it because it's an
Two to
operating
three
expense.
years, possibly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, but for the stuff that has a 5 year or longer life, pickup trucks and dump trailers, those kind of things, backhoes and all that kind of stuff, you know, and I'll give you a great example. I mean, one of my clients is a sod farm, and we got them to move from wholesale and start doing retail sales as well. But it required them to go buy a delivery truck. And I said, well, how much is a delivery truck? Well, 200,000. Well, what's the
Mm.
monthly payment? We're not going to write a check for 200,000. We're going to go finance it. And so we knew that we had plenty of customers that could easily cover that monthly payment of the truck is an operating expense in functional accounting. forget it. The accountant's going to make you take the note, book the trailer, book the monthly depreciation, split the note payment into principal and interest. Stop it. The monthly payment is an expense. Is the functional way to look at it, and that's how an entrepreneur thinks about it. That's really good.
Yep.
And so, we sell one pallet of sod, it pays for the truck.
Hmm.
I think we can sell more than one pallet of sod.
Yeah,
And,
Yep.
our
and
Yep.
our
then, so,
vans, our vans,
yeah,
for example, we lease them, but a van for us, we do
And the reason he
residential.
likes leasing is it shows
yeah.
up on the P&L
Shows on
then,
the
right?
P&L,
Well, yeah, but
but
yeah, and,
there's
and
you know,
not if you're following Gap. Unfortunately, I'll tell you that they actually don't.
Oh, they do.
So yeah, so
but
so
the
once again, but it's this
But functionally,
yeah,
lease is just a fancy word for a note that doesn't
yep,
fully advertise. And
yeah,
so yeah,
but the van produces $2,000 a day, and it costs
it,
us
exactly,
$1,200 a month. I mean, it's like
exactly.
it's
That's the way
negligible,
it
but
works.
so Greg, let's talk a little bit about when you're thinking about a business that does carry some debt.
Mhm.
Where are the like guardrails or the red flags for debt in a business? Because I'm
Yeah.
with you. I'm okay with debt in a business if it's responsible. We, I haven't
The
seen a
only
lot of responsible debt in some businesses that we've been looking at, especially smaller ones that are trying to figure this out. And so, like, how
well,
would you, when you're looking at a business in lawn care, especially, um, where would you say is a business is too far into debt, or where would that guardrail be? Does that make sense?
well, I mean, number one is, like I said, the only valid debt is for production equipment that you truly can make a profit off of, or otherwise you get out of that and take your lumps and sell
Yeah,
the equipment and clear as much of the debt as you can.
sell the
That's the only
car.
acceptable. That's the only acceptable debt. And line of credit debt is for temporary disruptions, but your goal is to be off the line and have the 2 month number. So we run this 100 company model that we use for our economic insight. And so since our clients are all different industries all over the U.S., we I used that model to write the second book, and we decided to keep it going, and we just depend to it every month, to get our read of the U.S. economy. And
huh.
and so out of those 100 companies, it's about 1.1 billion of revenue. So average about $11 million, annual revenue for the businesses in the model. Um, 80% of those businesses have zero drawn on line of credit. 80%.
Yeah,
I mean, and
that's
it's
healthy.
because now that group. I mean, we do
Is that
influence
because you coach, because you're leading them?
that yeah,
Yeah,
because
that's not
before
normal.
yeah that but once people start following simple numbers, I mean, I would almost it's a pretty close race between, I mean, our two core concepts that have totally transformed our clients' profitability and wealth building
Hmm.
capacity has been labor efficiency ratio
Yes.
and the core capital target, which is the 2 month cash number. I'd almost say the 2 month cash number might actually even have a greater impact because it is such a definitive
Hmm.
known number that is unique to each business. It's not a guess, it's not a wish, it's not a feeling,
Yep.
it's a finite number. We've probably helped more businesses with that concept. But and LER, you can kind of ebb and flow in terms of your discipline of dealing with labor because labor, the reason why we separate labor from all other costs, labor is the only cost that comes to work every day with an attitude. I mean, it has some good days and it's got some bad days.
Yep.
And
Well,
and the
and
problem with labor in making it a consistent result is the human element of it.
sure. Amen. Greg
Yeah.
Crabtree, ladies and gentlemen, this has been so good. I feel like I want to just say, don't read his books at your own peril. If you don't read his books and you screw up your business, we warned you. Like you gotta go do that. And here's the reality, I, I had this moment the other day where, we talk about a CEO's job is threefold: to set the vision, build the team, and don't run out of money. In other words, be fiscally responsible. And I had this little moment the other day with my 16-year-old son. He went. I said, "Hey, buddy, I want you to go take your sister out on a date, a 12-year-old sister." So he took her out to the movies. He said, "Dad, can I buy some popcorn?" I said, "Sure." And my wife gets back. She said, "Who went to the movies?" I said, "Well, my son," told her a story. He spent $75 at the concession stand, and 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 I feel like so often, like one step in the maturity, our maturity as business owners has to
Mhm.
be our willingness to take seriously the financial portion of our business.
Yeah.
It's like grow up. Grow up. It's
Mhm.
time to grow up and be an adult. And part of being an adult is managing your finances in a healthy way. And if you're not willing to do that, you will always suffer from stress and
Yeah.
struggle and pain. You will put your family through undue pain. You'll put your employees through undue pain and struggle. It's
Mhm.
your job to not be
Yeah.
the 16-year-old spending $75 at the concession stand.
Well,
And
and you're absolutely right because it is the CEO's job, not the accountant's job, whether
mm,
internal or external or what level of the accountant you have, because those accountants are going to be accountants. So of my consulting team, guess what? I'm the only CPA. All of my
mm,
consultants are MBAs, came from other types of finance or under other understanding, but they're not CPAs. And there's a reason why I market to CEOs. I don't market to CFOs. Matter of fact, the if I was doing a speaking event, the last group I want to talk to is a bunch of accountants because they're going to resist.
yep, yep,
Well, they're going to throw. It's like, listen, I got a list of successes, 10 miles long, folks. So I think I kind of know what I'm talking about. And and as you get the CEOs are typically the ones that engage us. And our goal is to elevate your team's understanding that you have doing the
yeah,
data. We work with companies that have CFOs. We work with companies that have, you know, the spouse of your gardeners, that keeps the books.
sure.
And you know what's funny is in a lot of businesses, I don't really need a lot of if somebody's faithful of putting in the transactions, we can help them make sense of it.
Yeah,
And the key is I'm not trying to fill up my dance card with hours. Yeah, and our team is really good. And the other thing, we also see in the industry is people say, "Oh, well, I need to clean up my books." No, you don't. No, I mean, we can make sense of bad data if we just have enough of it. You give me
yeah.
3 years of monthly P&Ls that are screwed up, and we'll make sense of it without having to. You spend $20,000, $30,000 of a cleanup project. That's just hogwash.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just not good money
So,
well
so,
spent.
so, so, Greg, how do they find you if they want to get in touch with you? If they wanted to,
Yeah.
if
So
they're inspired.
I'm probably the easiest person in the world to find. If you just Google Greg Crabtree or Simple Numbers, I am findable.
Great.
But simplenumberscri.com is the website to our practice unit, and there's a contact form there that Mike Maxon is our partner that does the client intake and talking to people about, hey, what does it mean to work with us? And here's kind of the thing, and I think you guys are much the same way based on things we talked about. We're trying to make this skill set accessible. I
Yeah.
mean, we're told
Yep.
all the time we could charge 2 and 3 times as much as what we charge, and we're trying to bring McKinsey consulting level advice to the $1 to $10 million business.
Hmm.
And to be quite honest, I think I can outrun McKinsey most of the time myself. Because the idea is we're not burdened we want to deliver value and we have conceptual beliefs of what we believe in
Yep.
and that we've had great success in seeing our clients execute and we get love letters from our clients. Tell me how many accountants get love letters. I mean, yeah, it's like
They get,
really.
what's the opposite of a love letter? I'm sure they get
Yeah.
something
Oh
else.
yeah. Get a lot of hate mail. Yeah. So and so the idea is our goal is we've got to run a profitable business. I mean, I'm held accountable as the partner in charge of my unit. When we merge, that I mean, I got to run a valid business, but I got to eat my own cooking. I got to do the same things I'm telling you to do. And but the thing is we're like you guys. We want to have impact because there's not a lot of people trying to do what we're trying to do,
Yeah.
and 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 that's a shame. But I don't have the years in my life left or the energy to go try to move that immovable object of the accounting profession.
Yep.
And to a certain degree, I've been able to work my way to where I'm now because I'm now part. My practice unit's not a CPA firm, as I said before. I'm not doing audits. I'm not bound by GAAP or generally accepted accounting principles. Now we create a lot of usable data that to be quite honest, most people don't realize I don't have to produce a generally accepted accounting principles financial statement to even get bank financing. We can give the bank an alternative form of financial data as long as you tell them how you did it.
Yep.
And we've helped many clients that needed financing to get it using alternative presentations that didn't exactly meet the accounting profession's guidelines, because GAAP doesn't always give you the clearest answer,
Yeah.
and it doesn't even give you the
It,
right answer.
it rarely does.
It
So,
rarely does. Absolutely.
Greg, we are so honored. We won't take any more time. We could honestly, between
Oh.
Aaron and I, we probably want to like become best friends and go on.
We
Become,
can always do future.
go on,
more things to talk about.
camping trips together. But no, we are so grateful that you've taken time with us.
sure.
We're grateful that you're devoted to the entrepreneur in the way that you are and all the good that you're doing in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to the Lawn Care CEO podcast. Once again, go track down Greg Crabtree, easy man to find, and then go do more good with the profits that you have. Thanks for being with us.